So now we're going to add simple FK joints to the eyebrows as a way of controlling their deformations. Although this isn't the method that I'm going to ultimately use in this character, I'm going to show it anyway just as another very quick way of adding controls into the brow. One thing with the brow that we typically will be concerned with is creating S-curves and simple arcs to raise the brows up or to bring them down. So first we're going to create a set of joints. And you can start at either end, either from the inside out or the outside in. For many of the animators that I've created brow joints for that have preferred the joint method, also have preferred outside in. So that's what I'm going to use for this demonstration. First I'm going to turn on my point snap, and then in the animation module select skeleton, joint tool, and just start at one of the outside corners. Okay, so there's our first brow. Open up our hypergraph, frame that. Make these a little smaller. So with all the joints selected, I'm going to show their local rotation axes. Display, component display, local rotation axes. Now what we want to do here is we want to align the local rotation axes in a logical manner. If this were more of a human-like face, where the slope of the brow would not be so steep, rather it would slope something like that, more of an upward, these local rotation axes would sort of match that angle from the brow to the forehead. But in this case, with the y-axis pointing more or less straight up, that will actually work pretty well for what we're doing here. I'm going to go in and adjust a couple of these. I've switched to component mode, and I'm going to click on the question mark icon, which selects local rotation axes. Switch to a side view. I'm just rotating these on X until they're pointing more or less straight up and down. The y-axis, that is. Okay, switch back to object mode. Okay, now since I'm going to mirror these joints, I'm going to go in and rename them. I'll select all of them. Yeah, let me go in and select all of them, modify, search and replace names. I'm going to change every instance of joint. I'm going to search for a joint and change them to our naming convention. In this case, it's going to be L brow 0. Then I'm going to manually add the underscore JNT. Once again, that's the naming convention that I'm using throughout for joints that are added into the skin cluster. This last joint I'm going to add an END suffix. And while I have that last joint selected, I'm going to orient it to match its parent. And although we're not going to skin to it, it's just something I like doing. So with the last joint selected, skeleton, orient joint, option box, and make sure that orientation is set to none. So it pops to match its parent's orientation. Select all these and toggle off their local rotation axis display. Okay, I'm going to mirror these real quick by selecting the first brow joint, and then selecting skeleton, mirror joint tool. Once again, I'm mirroring across the YZ axis which splits through the center of the character. And I'm going to search for underscore L underscore and replace it with right. So that's why we needed to go in and name these, since I knew that I was going to mirror them. Okay, so now we have two sets of brow joints that are mirrored behaviorally from one another. I'm going to parent these to this upper head joint. Okay, let's add them into the skin cluster. Select our head mesh. I'm going to shift select all of these joints. And then from the skin menu, select skin, edit smooth skin, add influence, an option box. We want to make sure that the use geometry is disabled. It's not toggled on, since we're using joints as an added influence rather than geometry. And also I have lock weights toggled on, since I want to go in and explicitly add in the weight values myself and not disrupt any of the weighting that I've done. This will lock the weighting on the influences that I'm adding, and I'll have to go in and unlock them later. Now you can see when I select any of these joints, they're added into the skin cluster. So I'm going to do a little bit of weighting on them. Do a quick up and down animation with them. Okay, so now once again I'm going to go in and select the mesh. I'm going to right mouse click on that selection and scroll down to paint, and then from there select skin cluster and then click on the head skin cluster, then double click on the paint skin weights tool, the tool palette over to the left. I'm setting my opacity to 100%, solid brush, and my paint operation to replace. I set my value to 100%. I scroll down until I find the brow joints, which have their hold toggled. So I'm going to select each of them and toggle the hold weights off. So then I'll be able to go in and edit the weights. And I'll repeat that for the right-sided brow joints. Okay, so go back to the left brow joints. Start painting in these weights. So these are 100% weights, and typically I'm just going in and roughing in these weights. I'll go back in and finesse them later. At this point I'm just sort of just getting them to work, just blocking them in, so to speak. Okay, a little more weighting. So now with a 0.5 value, I'm going in and sort of averaging these weights where the joints split. Okay, so our rough weighting pass. Okay, go on and finesse this a bit more. I'm going to switch to the soft brush, drop down the opacity to 0.25, change my value to 0.125. I'm going to switch to the Wacom tablet and start going in and painting these weights in a little more refined manner. Once again, working roughly, just working out the major volume issues at this point. I'll go back in later and finesse this. Okay. Okay, basically all that I'm doing is just going in and extending the range of deformations from these brow joints. Okay, so I'm going to go to the head 3 joint and pull some of these verts down a bit. You can see a little bit of crunching going on there. Crunching, technical deformation term there. This is going to be a bit of a balancing act because it's also going to have to work in the opposite direction. Okay, so let's swing it in the opposite direction and see what we have. Not too bad. Actually going to grab those joints and rotate them down a bit further. Okay, there we go. Okay, once again, use the head 3 joint toward the top to deal with some of these deformation issues. This is part of that balancing act I was talking about, making sure that everything works in both directions. Painting with very small values at this point. I'm on the soft brush still, but with a value at 0.05. Nevertheless, this is first pass for the weighting, not anything that I would consider refined. Just testing it out, making sure that the joint structure that I have in there will work. One thing I'll do also after I mirror this is go in and add a little bit of influence to both in the center. Let me mirror this first. Again, select our quick select set. I've got something going on with the joints here. Okay, there we go. Okay, now we'll go back in and select the quick select set. It selects all the vertices except for the center, so we can mirror from one side to the other. Then select skin, edit smooth skin, mirror skin weights tool. Make sure it's selecting the mirror across Y to Z axis, which cuts down the middle of the character. Okay, now that we have that mirrored, I'm going to go in and add some weight influence into the center eye of this character. Okay, reactivate our paint weights tool and find our left brow forejoint. I'm going to go on a solid brush at 100%. Let's take that down to 0.25, but still a solid brush. Okay, and do the same with the right. Okay, so just a little bit of drag in the center. Okay, so that's a pretty brief lesson, but just showing how we can add brow joints into the center of the head here. I'm not resetting this to 0 at the end. Okay. Now that we have rough weighting, I'm going to make one more change to this joint structure. What I'm going to do is, rather than having these joints directly parented to this head joint, I'm going to unparent them, so selecting the first brow joint and then selecting Edit, Unparent. So now they're free floating, they're no longer in the hierarchy. Then I'm going to draw a joint from this base head joint ending at the base of the brow. What I'm going to do is select this head joint and duplicate it. So edit, duplicate. Let's look in our hypergraph. Okay, and there we have our duplicate. I'm going to call this L brow base joint. Okay, now I'm going to mirror this joint. Skeleton, mirror joint. Okay, so now we're going to parent each of these to our new base joint. Now the base joint I'm going to parent to this head joint. What this does is it gives us an extra level of freedom. As you can see, we still have the brow rotations, but you can also, independent of the head, go in and rotate from the base of the head. So it's just adding an extra level of rotational control independent of the head joint. So go in and remove, hide the visibility and radius. Translate, I'd probably lock on these, but you probably want to leave scale open so you can scale in and out, particularly in and out. You Okay, so there is a brief demonstration of adding simple FK joints to the brow. So in the next lesson, we're going to create another type of brow rigging, which relies on joints once again, but it sort of breaks this FK structure here. Behaves in a similar fashion, but works in a more IK type fashion. Gives some would say a little more flexibility with how you can contour the brow.